Interior, gray void with splotches in background, day. The scene opens to reveal JP standing there with his dumb meme face that's so old now that most people don't even realize it's cringe. He holds his usual pencil in his hand with a book labeled Best Story Ever in his other. The camera zooms in on his stupid face. JP, speaking in a strained tone that suggests he clearly doesn't believe in what he's selling. Hey everyone, Terrible Writing Advice is here to set the scene on writing scenes. A scene is a building block of storytelling. It's a self-contained, unbroken chunk of the story without a major shift in setting or time. Characters walking down an alley and talking is a scene, as is characters going crazy at a party or two characters dueling under the moonlight. Linking, transitioning, and constructing scenes is an essential skill for a writer to master. But not me. I'm going to coast by on sheer talent. I don't need to know how to write a scene because I am just so amazing on my own. That makes me the best person to listen to on the fine details of scene building. Self-proclaimed know-it-alls who revel in ignorance are the best guides, of course. So with the scene set, let's dive into how to write a scene. Now, when building a scene, what's the first thing a writer should do? Why, a good writer jumps right into the good stuff like action and dialogue. I'm not forgetting anything, right? Nah, nothing is wrong as characters talk to each other in a freaking void. Especially for book writers. Book writers don't need to worry about forgetting to set the scene, because I'm sure the audience will be able to read my mind and see the scene just as I do in my head. Fanfic writers, I'm looking at you for being great, as they don't need to set the scene at all. If I remembered to set the scene, then I would be stuck doing all kinds of annoying, unnecessary things like using descriptive details, engaging all the senses, using a character's perspective and point of view to describe the scene and thus also provide characterization on top of description, or move the location description from abstract to concrete using solid descriptors. Concrete descriptors are basically the difference between describing a house or a two-story suburban home with vinyl siding and a manicured lawn, or a house versus a shanty hobbled together with stray rusted metal sheets with the rickety pickup truck parked in a gravel driveway. A house is pretty basic and abstract, but the other two paint a much clearer picture. A clear, unnecessary picture that can be ignored because I'm sure the audience will be able to magically glean my mental image without the need for any clarification. If a writer does want to go the extra mile to describe the setting of the scene, then that writer should get easily distracted by the setting itself and forget to put anyone in it. This is definitely something that I've never done in my earlier drafts, and you have no evidence because I erased it. Just stick to describing the scene because that's what scenery is. The goal definitely isn't to create a solid sense of place, especially a place that people frequent and live in. Descriptive prose works best when dumped into the scene like the perfunctory side note it is, and not be regarded as an essential part of the scene. Speaking of setting the scene, writers should always default to the following: coffee shops in contemporary fiction, taverns and campfires for fantasy, and science fiction has its ever-present briefing room. That's not to say that these are bad and that a writer should never use them. The main takeaway is that a writer should always simply go with whatever default first thing that pops into their head setting and never consider moving the scene to a more interesting setting. If it's not a theatrical production, then changing up the setting is an option that a writer should never exercise. Just trap the audience in that freaking coffee shop every scene until they go insane. Never consider moving the scene to a park or car drive or anything else more dynamic. Treat the setting just like a static background prop that is described exactly once and then forgotten. With the background safely ignored, what happens in the scene? Well, the characters talk. They talk and talk and talk. Just big blocks of words. Everyone loves talking heads and huge chunks of unwieldy dialogue. Endless scenes of people just talking will never get old or stale or just bore me to the point of tears. Should I break up the dialogue a bit with gestures, facial expressions, actions, or just about anything, really? Even if just to make the paragraphs look a little less like a wall? No, just talking heads for freaking ever. Of course the characters are just standing around and talking. Everyone knows that scenes can only do one thing at a time. Like a scene dedicated to exposition cannot also have characterization at the same time. Have a tense argument about a world-building detail that highlights not only a sharp difference between characters informed by their backstory and rival economic and social groups, but also that provides the audience key insight into the existing hierarchies within the world? No way! Write a scene with a mix of world-building, characterization, plot advancement, or exposition? Impossible. It's too hard, I say, even as amateur fanfic writers pull it off. I'll instead just stick to a plain old info dumping scene to handle my exposition while I put everyone's character on hold. Never have scenes pull double or even triple duty. Good writing doesn't let the writing multitask, and instead, the writer should reduce scenes to a singular aspect, no matter how boring it makes the story. I refuse to learn how to write a scene that does more than one thing at a time, nor am I willing to fix this issue during the revision process. See, from my perspective, I don't need to bother to multi-layer my scenes. Speaking of perspective, point of view can be easily ignored when writing a scene. Now, point of view is another of those larger topics I plan to cover sometime in the future. For the purposes of scene writing, though, it's important to remember that point of view is more like a suggestion. Feel free to throw out an entire tightly written first-person narrative to describe a scene subtly from third person, or start head jumping between character POVs in the middle of a scene, no matter how jarring it is to read. The criteria for breaking POV in a scene should basically come down to I feel like it. Consistency first, unless it contradicts my creative whims while also not providing any creative payoff. What about pacing in a scene? Yeah, what about it? Pacing can be safely ignored, especially during the revision process. Why should I have to worry about the scene dragging too long? All of my scenes are perfectly paced even if they don't flow naturally while reading them. Now, in my experience, slow pacing tends to happen more than pacing that's too fast. Slow pacing is also easier to fix since the writer usually can just make a few snips here and there that can improve and smooth the scene's natural flow from one point to the next. Finding pacing that flows is more art than science and can be difficult to diagnose, especially since critique groups tend to misattribute a lot of other problems as pacing problems. When a beta reader says, "This scene drags," it could be that the scene just goes on too long, but it could also mean that the conflict in the scene isn't engaging, or the characterization isn't firing on all cylinders, or a host of other problems that can make readers disengage. How to tell what the real problem is? Don't. Instead, just blame the beta reader for reading it wrong and get into a huge argument. That's way more productive than just fixing the stupid scene. Similar things could be said about transitioning between scenes. Basically, a writer doesn't need to worry about that at all. This is very noticeable in older books before we got all fancy and scene transitions became the norm. But I intend to buck newer trends of smooth endings and return to the days that a writer could simply end a scene on a whim. Have audience expectations shifted to expect more smooth transitions between scenes? No, it's the audience who's in the wrong. Besides, scene transitions are more art than science again. The scene either ends on something punchy or witty that brings the scene to a close. This leaves the audience with a small, pithy line that adds levity while closing out the scene in a way that feels natural. There is also ending on something that creates a new situation for the next scene, like a character barging in and exclaiming that something has happened. This ends the scene by shifting focus away from the previous conflict and begins setting up the very next conflict or situation the characters have to deal with. Another way to end a scene is on something ominous and dark that foreshadows a future conflict much further down the road. The main thing is to focus on having a final line that feels like an endpoint. But rather than focusing on something that feels like a natural endpoint, I think instead I'll just end the scene when I get bored with it. Then I'll just stumble into the next scene without preamble. So I've dismissed needing to master point of view, pacing, and transitions. That means I will still consider tone, right? Right? No, of course not. Writers don't need to worry about tone in a scene. The last scene featured an orphan burning to death seconds before he got adopted by the loving family that were crushed trying to rescue him. Clearly the next scene should be a lighthearted romp with no space in between for the audience to emotionally process the previous scene. When the story has an emotional high point, it can often take the audience a bit to process said emotions and allow for a scene's tone to smoothly transition from light to heavy. See, this isn't a problem because a good writer doesn't ever bother to elicit any emotional reaction from the audience at all. Good writing only leaves the audience in a boredom-induced stupor, or a sense of vague jealousy directed at the power fantasy wish fulfillment self-insert main character. This makes trying to balance between serious and light tones largely a wasted effort. This frees the writing from having to space out more serious scenes as to not overwhelm the audience with endless darkness. This is really hard to do while also sprinkling in lighter scenes to balance out the mood somewhat. Good thing I don't need to worry about that. Can a writer just move a scene? No, never, not under any circumstances. Now, sometimes the plot demands certain things happen at certain times. This also means that a writer should be equally inflexible with all scenes as a result, and never should they consider moving scenes around to account for things like tone, pacing, or story flow. What if a writer has mastered tone, pacing, point of view, and transitions, but still feels like a scene isn't working? Well, then the scene may have a problem with its conflicts. Conflict is one of the main drivers of storytelling. That's why writers go on and on about it. I often find that conflict issues within a scene tend to vary based on writer skill level, which are as follows. No conflict. The best kind of conflict. This is what I see most commonly in amateur fiction. Many new writers often don't know that conflict is often what makes character interactions interesting. These new writers tend to just forget to put any kind of conflict in their stories, which is good. We aren't here for conflict. We're here to watch a character just get everything they want without having to raise a finger. This no effort, all reward approach is the best way to write. Forced conflict. Intermediate writers tend to understand that fiction sometimes needs conflict, but they are not always good at writing it, so their solution is to force it into a scene. This never leads to issues like characters fighting over nothing, or more often when the audience sees through the conflict as a transparent ploy by the writer to pad out the scene. How can this be fixed? By ignoring it and hope it goes away, not by workshopping it until the conflict in the scene feels more natural. Pointless conflict. This is the bane of professional writers. It is shockingly common with big-name authors who have achieved the coveted cash cow status with their publishers. This results in the removal of the spinal columns of any editors assigned to the author. Don't want to upset the cash cow after all. These writers are still skilled though. Usually. And as such are competent at writing scenes with engaging in natural feeling conflict. Said conflict though has nothing to do with the plot. It's well-written conflict, but is largely pointless in the larger context to the story. Can this be fixed? Of course, but it won't be because the sales figures will still be the same either way. But why doesn't the writer simply remove the scene? Because it's my darling scene. It doesn't have to tie into the main plot or fit within the context of the story because the scene is well written. Well-written scenes don't have to justify their existence within the story. Now, people often say, murder your darlings in writing, which is why I murder those people first before they can turn me against my precious darlings. Never remove a scene that adds nothing to the story. Protect your precious darlings no matter the cost, even if 1. No characters develop and the audience doesn't get to see the characters in a new light. 2. The plot doesn't move forward. 3. There is no exposition or world building. And or 4. Nothing changes at all. Characterization in a vacuum is good enough for me. Who cares if it spoils the pacing? I will simply ignore that literally every member of my writers group, every beta reader, and my editor all agree that the scene needs to go. I will defend my darlings to my final breath. A writer should never stop and ask, what does this scene add to the story? What is its purpose in the larger narrative? If this scene were removed, would anything of value be lost? Writers don't need to worry about such questions during the revision process because writers shouldn't be revising anyway. All I pin to page is golden on the first try, and anyone who suggests otherwise are just haters and naysayers jealous of my immense talent and endearing collection of non-murdered darlings. Remember that a good scene is written all in one go on the first draft, not revised into being a good scene, usually after multiple drafts. Scene writing isn't a skill honed over time and experience until it becomes more instinct than anything. This means that a writer doesn't need to keep an open mind and develop an eye for key revisions to tweak each scene for maximum performance until every scene hums along nicely and maintains a feeling of natural narrative flow. Yes, this scene doesn't add anything to the story, but the fact that it's well written is always justification enough for a scene's inclusion. A writer should never worry that just because they're unwilling to murder their darlings, that their darlings won't hesitate to murder the story.
Wake up, capitalist pig.
Oh hey, it's the space communist. We've been looking for you guys.
Silence, bourgeoisie. Stand in awe of our leader, Comrade Prime.
I welcome you, foolish though you are, to our glorious space commune. I am Comrade Prime.
You mean we, right?
Yes, I mean, we are Comrade Prime, collectivist leader of the collectivist space communist, who are very collectivist, and you have been caught trespassing.
Hear us out. As a revolutionary against the evil empire, I'm a big fan of yours.
We were hoping to join forces against greed and...
Silence! As trespassers, there is only one punishment. You shall be subject to a tour. Observe the glorious motherland, where we all are rewarded, each according to their ability, each each according to their needs, fully automated and luxury. A true utopia.
Wow, how does it work?
It just works. Trust me.
Greetings, my wayward space communist. Now put down your silly books on theory and listen up.
What's that?
Ugh, Greed has been bugging us for months now. He's been spamming our transmission lines with his endless shilling, as if we would ever join a pathetic capitalist dog like him.
I have been very reasonable and patient, but time is almost up. This is your last chance to join up with the winning side. There's more than enough room in my camp for you, but I'm not going to leave my flank exposed.
Flank?
I don't know what he's talking about either.
I think he's referring to having a strategy. Strategy? What's that?
Sounds like a capitalist thing.
Regardless, it's time to make a choice. If I don't hear back from you, then I will have you removed. The thing is, I have an edge that you do not, especially in information warfare.
At first, I completely missed the Screen Actors Guild agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers over AI, the story having been buried under a deluge of 24-hour news, especially considering recent events. Thankfully, I was able to sort through the nightmare of information overload that our media-oversaturated internet inflicts on us thanks to a special tool in my arsenal. This video's sponsor, Ground News, which lets me see the news without the tiresome partisanship that has divided our media landscape. It's a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer that utilizes a data-driven approach to the news. Every story comes with a factuality, political bias, and ownership of the reporting source, backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. Like for the coverage of the Screen Actors Guild story, Ground News shows that of the 89 sources, over half lean center, while a little over a third leans to the left and 14% lean to the right. The owners of these sources were mostly media conglomerates at 47%. We can even see the difference in headlines, with right-leaning sources focusing more on AI in their headlines. Compare and contrast related stories from different sources to see what details are highlighted or downplayed. The blind spot feed is handy as it shows what stories one side of the political aisle are focusing on, while the other sees fit to ignore. Having a complete understanding of what all sides are thinking is rarely a disadvantage. We must venture out of our comfort zone every so often, and even if you considered the other side your enemy, wouldn't you rather know what they are thinking? Challenge your assumptions, or risk having them used against you. To help with this, Ground News even has a new feature in its Vantage subscription plan called My News Bias. It's a handy dashboard that breaks down your news consumption habits, what topics you engage with, and how your reading habits have changed. TWA fans can go to Ground News/Terrible Writing Advice to get the best deal of the year with 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription. You can check out the link in the description below to get unlimited access to all Ground News features for just $5 a month until November 30th.
Regardless, my offer is on the table. Your move, but don't take long. It's winner take all, and I intend to take everything.
Fool, we are on the verge of victory. Greed is already too late. The Terrible Writing Advice expanded universe is as good as ours. We shall unveil our secret weapon.